Sorry about the picture quality, is the best I could find. This woman's name is Angie Mozillo. July 17th, 1989 was the day that changed her life forever. The police came to her house, knocked on the door, asked her to come with them down to the station, and there they explained to her that her husband had just been arrested for conspiracy and to murder his own father, and he'd done it. He'd pulled it off, killed his own dad. She was 20, newly married, and 7 months pregnant with that man's child, their first child. Can you begin to imagine what she was feeling in that moment? The man that you've trusted, that you've said I do to, you're having a child with, turns out to be a murderer. Her life fell apart. She said every day there were, in the paper, there were headlines and evening news stories about the case. Sometimes she said the journalists would take pity and leave my name out. Many times they wouldn't. My hometown community whispered, my faith community judged. Friends walked away, all while the sordid details of the act were revealed. His trial and sentencing to 22 years to life brought even more press coverage and chatter. Her life fell apart. She became an alcoholic. She turned to drugs to survive, and none of that part's true. But it wouldn't have surprised you if I'd have told you that, right? That's not what actually happened to her. After the birth of her child, she realized she needed to make some changes to her life. She said, it required me to step out of my complacency and into action. As I navigated the divorce process, I had to use my voice in a new and assertive way, something that was not my normal. Being strapped with all the financial obligations of the divorce and fighting finance companies over the debts that he had incurred tested my negotiation skills. She said, I faced and dealt with the overwhelming emotional fallout of fear, loss of trust, anxiety, betrayal. And she said, I love this sentence. She said, for the first time in my life, I was truly choosing to happen to life rather than letting life happen to me. You know there's a difference, right? She wasn't just letting life happen anymore. She was making things happen. She said, in the years since, I have found a healthy and loving relationship with my new husband of 25 years. I've raised 3 daughters to be strong, independent women. I returned to college at the age of 35 and earned my college degree on the same day that my oldest daughter earned hers. I've traveled the world. My experiences have helped me to empower other women to move forward. I decided that my life would be a life of victory, not of being a victim of his actions and the judgment and the darkness that they brought. Isn't that an incredible story? Does it surprise you at all that she is a professional life coach today? That's just an amazing example of resilience. I love that story. Resilience is this. Resilience is the ability to adapt and bounce back when things don't go as planned. Ever have something not go as planned in your life? Right? That's resilience, ability to bounce back when things don't. But I love this one too. It's the capacity not just to face what's hurting you, but to overcome it. And look at this last part, even be strengthened by the experiences of adversity. Is that what happens to you? Tough things happen and they just like fire you up. Challenges and problems come up. You get financial bad news and you're like, oh yeah, bring it on. You face it and you overcome it and you're strengthened by that challenge. Is that what happens inside of you? That's resilience. Now, how important is that for your life? How important is that for your life, your future? I mean, essential, right? Because without resilience, what happens is you get knocked down, you stay down. You stay stuck in your pain. You stay stuck in your past, stuck in your failures. You don't ever move on to the life that God has for you. Problems just wipe you out. Now, the reality is, resilience has always been a challenging thing to develop, but what is being written, if you want to do something interesting, go home and search for resilience plus this youngest generation. The things that are being written about this are really, really concerning. If you just Google it, here's one of the first articles that pops up. Coddled kids crumble. Colleges see big lack of resilience among students. The article is amazing. It's talking about how these kids are totally unprepared for college day one. They fall apart at the slightest things. One of the professors, one of the parts of the article that was so amazing was professors talking about how hard it is to give accurate grades to these kids today. Because if they don't do a good job and they get a D or an F, they have to sit and listen to them sob and cry out of control in the professor's office for so long. And they're just like emotionally worn out by this because they break so easily. Anything doesn't go their way and they just fall apart. They're so easily shattered and they just quit and then they give up and then they don't even try because they're just going to fail anyway. It's like resilience. This essential skill, it's like it's being depleted with each generation that comes along. But the reality is, we all know, again, regardless of your age, how important this is for our lives, right? Because isn't this true? I mean, this isn't controversial. You are going to get knocked down. You're going to get knocked down. You are going to face something that hurts and feels overwhelming, and you're going to have problems, and you're going to have things not go right, right? Some of you had that happen last week. It's really fresh in your mind. Some of you, it's next week's issue, right? This is life. This is life. So we're in this series called Your Attitude, Your Choice, and what I want to tell you is the really good news about all this is you get to choose this. You get to choose how you get back up, how fast you get back up. You choose that. That woman got back up from unbelievable circumstances, right? You can do it too. Chances are that's not your story this next week. Hopefully not for any of you, right? She got back up. Anyone can. You can learn resilience. So we're going to talk about this as we continue our series, Your Attitude, Your Life. We're going to talk about how to develop resilience. Would you open your program inside? You'll find these notes. I really want you to take your notes out today. Grab a pen. There are going to be some things I want you to underline as we go through parts of this. Really important things. And I want to show you how to develop this skill of resilience. And I really am excited to tell you it is under your control. Welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Glad you've tuned in, or those of you who are watching on our website. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, in the description section are the notes. You can open those up and follow along with us today. Let's jump right into this. The first thing I'd say is you have to learn how to normalize adversity and failure. Normalize this. And what I mean by that is you are going to fail. And you're going to have hard things happen to you, and that's just normal. Normalize adversity, normalize failure. It's interesting, if you like history at all, you know who this man is. Thomas Edison, inventor of so many things like the light bulb. And if you know the story of Thomas Edison, you know in his laboratory, he tried and experimented with thousands of things that failed before they worked. Did you know that? Thousands of failures before he had his success, and we have light bulbs. He was resilient. There were things about him that allowed him to just keep going with failure after failure after failure after, I mean, thousands of failures. How many of you would quit after 1,000 times or 2,000 times or 3,000 times? And he just wouldn't. He kept going and kept going and kept going. That resilience is what allows him to be someone that we still talk about to this day. Your resilience is your choice. Now, the interesting thing, again, is like I said, what made him so resilient, and then so, like the example of these college professors and kids today, what's the difference? One of the things that's being written about today a lot is the negative impact of social media on resilience in our youngest generation. Do you know how much time a teenager spends online today? Look this up before I came in. 9 hours a day. 9 hours a day online. That's the average for a teenager. And so this constant bombardment is going through into their brains about what life is about, and it's skewed. You can actually go online. Did you know that? I found this. You fake a perfect life on Instagram. Do you know that there are websites you can pay that will help you fake a perfect life on Instagram? That seems valuable, doesn't it? But that's the world that we live in. Matter of fact, one of the studies said what they discovered is the more miserable your life is, the happier your social media posts are. Did you know that? Some of you know that. You're like, you know some of the people that are posting, you're like, what? But the reality is, the problem is that the youngest generation doesn't know that yet. They have no perspective about life yet. They don't have enough years of living it to say, wait a second, that person's as screwed up as I know. How can this be that? So what happens, as one author said, we don't want our friends to think we're lonely, so we post photos and statuses that show how much fun we're having. And we don't want anyone to know that we eat a lot, so we post photos of our artsy salads. And they said social media is skewing our perception of reality. That's what happens 9 hours a day. They have no perception. They have no accurate view of reality, because that's not reality. So what they're saying in these articles is, we're looking, teens today are looking 9 hours a day at everybody else's life. And they're looking at it going, oh my goodness, they're having the perfect vacation right now. Perfect. I'm not on perfect vacation. They have perfect hair. They have hair. They have perfect clothing. I don't have perfect clothing. And they roll out of bed looking like that. It's perfect. I don't roll out of bed looking like that. And they're even eating the perfect sandwich. My sandwich isn't perfect. And so it's just non-stop. And again, it's not like it's intentional. It's not like I'm going to wake up today and compare my life to theirs. It's all just happening subtly. It happens automatically. And if you don't know this, comparison is the thief of contentment. 9 hours a day comparing your life to everybody else's perfect fake life on social media. And so the message, and again, what that author said is their perception of reality, our perception of reality gets skewed. We look around at everybody else's perfect posts and perfect social media and perfect everything, and we think something's wrong with me. Because my life isn't perfect, I have problems. And they don't. And so we think something's wrong. When the reality is, oh, they got problems. And they have challenges. And they have failures. And they have hardships, just like you. And there's nothing wrong with you at all. You are completely normal. And you don't even know that. The challenges and problems and hardship and failure, these are completely normal. The people you think of in your life that you admire the most successful people that you can think of in your life today, they have tremendous challenges in their life and failures. Did you know that less than 20% of people successfully achieve their goal the first time around? Did you know that? So if we talk about goals every year, when we set goals in the beginning of the year, do you know how more than 80% of us who set goals, and I do, fail the first time we put a goal down? We have a high failure rate, and we just keep trying. This is just normal. You are a failure in some areas of your life. And you have problems and challenges, and it's just totally normal. And there's nothing wrong with you. The Bible is so direct about this. Take a look at this verse. Job in the Old Testament said, shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? What was his expectation? What was he expecting in life? Following God means a perfect life and no problems and no failures and no challenges, right? Is that what he's expecting? Nope. No expectation about that at all. He knew that following God meant good and bad, right? He had that expectation. He had that understanding. It was wired into his DNA. He understood it. So when it happened, he didn't overreact and think, oh, great, God hates me. God can't stand me. Look at the bad that's happened in my life. And he was resilient. In the New Testament, the writer of the book of Hebrews was writing to some Christians talking about what they'd lived through already. And if you don't know this, 2,000 years ago, there were many places around the globe where if you said, I'm a follower of Jesus, they could do anything to you. Look at what they were experiencing. Sometimes, he said, you were exposed to public ridicule and were beaten just because you believed in Jesus. How many of you would be here today if you knew that there was a chance you could be beaten just for coming here? Not an interesting question to kick around, huh? Sometimes you helped others who were suffering the same things. But look at this. He said, you suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, and when all you owned was taken from you, you cried like babies for days and days and days and days. No. Isn't that incredible? Look at their attitude. You accepted it with joy. And the reason is because of what was in their head. You knew there were better things waiting for you that will last forever. It is not what happens to you that determines your resilience, right? It's what happens in here. Now, we're going to cover more about that in a minute, but there it is right there. What would be your reaction if just because you believe in Jesus, you were beaten, thrown into jail, and everything you owned was confiscated, and you had nothing left on earth? Would it be joy? Would it be joy? Some of you are facing far less, more challenging circumstances than everything being confiscated from you and being beaten just because you believe in Jesus, and you don't have joy today. Far less. And you don't have joy. It's not what's happening to you, it's what's happening inside of you that always determines whether or not you're going to be resilient. But the first aspect of this is just to normalize all of this. My whole perspective on this really changed when I read something by this man, Rick Warren, and that's his wife, Kay. He wrote an amazing book called The Purpose-Driven Life. Highly recommend this book. And years ago, when he published this book, he became a multi-millionaire. Because it became, thank you, one of the most popular books in history. And so he had more money and knew what to do with, and he handled it so well. He set up this company, a nonprofit to help make an impact on third world issues, and we're going to try and partner with them later in the year. He reversed tithes. He gives 90% of his income and lives on 10%. I mean, he's so generous. And so all of a sudden he's got wealth and he's got this tremendous success, and in the middle of it, his wife is diagnosed with cancer. And they don't know if she's going to make it. And all the prayers of this church, and this church, one of the largest in the country, don't seem to be working. And that's, he said, where he had a profound insight. This is so important for you to understand. He said he used to think, and I used to think this way too, that life is like this series of hills and valleys. Sometimes things are going good, I'm on the hilltop up. Sometimes things are bad, I'm on the valley. And that's how some of you still think. And if you think that way, resilience is going to be a challenge for you. He said once his wife was diagnosed with cancer and he had to live with this tremendous success and this tremendous pain at the same time, he realized that life is like railroad tracks. And you always have one wheel on a track that's going good. Always. There are always things in your life today that you could be grateful for. Always. And you always have one wheel on a track where things aren't going good. Always. And that's completely normal. That's normal. You have both tracks in your life today. You've got things going good and you got things not going good. Welcome to the human race. Now, this is really important for two reasons. First off, some of you have a one-track mind. Some of you today, you have a one-track mind, and all you're focused on is the things that aren't going good. This is bad, and this is bad. Guess how you're going to feel. Guess what's going to happen to your attitude. Guess what's going to happen to resilience if that's what you got in your mind. You will not get back up. You will develop the wrong attitudes internally, the wrong perceptions on what you're going through, and you will not get back up. You've got to let go of the one-track mind. You have two. And if you're really struggling with that, go back and listen to last week's message and do what it says. Do what it says. Because your attitude is under your control. You get to choose whether or not you're going to be positive or negative. You choose that. And you can learn how to develop a two-track mind. And we talked about that last week. But the other part of this is you need to just be okay with the fact that you have both tracks at the same time, and you will never spend a day on earth where you don't have both. And there's not something wrong with you. And I don't care how much they post about their pretty new clothes and their beautiful new haircut. They got both tracks too. And if you could see into their life, really see into all the pain they were experiencing, you'd get that. They have two tracks too. There's nothing wrong with you. It's both, okay? So we normalize pain and suffering and this kind of stuff. This is just how it is. Ignore the perfect fake messages of this world. This is normal. Now, once you understand that you live on both tracks at the same time, now we can talk about what to do when the painful track gets really big. So now, the second part of this is now you have to learn how to develop the right attitude in the middle of adversity. When things go wrong, when you fail, when you're in pain, when things are not going the way you really want them to go, now you have to learn how to develop the right attitude. So you know it's going to happen. You know you will always have this. So you're not surprised when difficult things happen, when challenges come up. They're going to come up. It's life. You have both tracks. So now what do? This man's name is George Bonanno. He is a clinical psychologist at Columbia University's Teachers College. He heads the Loss, Trauma, and Emotion Lab. How would you like to head that lab? Loss, trauma, and emotion. For 25 years, he and his team have been studying resilience. Here's the question that haunts them. And you've seen this. In your life, you have seen this. Did you ever have someone, when you were in school, think back when you were in school, did you ever have somebody come from a really broken home? Maybe a friend that, their parents were alcoholics, maybe they were really in trouble, maybe one of them was in jail, and yet that kid grew up and they were a straight A student and they succeeded in life, and yet you had other kids coming from the same kind of broken home and they went down that path. They were alcoholics, they became violent, they were in jail right away, right? You saw both. If you think through your school experience, I certainly did, there were kids that I went to school with who were incredible, resilient. They bounced back from unbelievable things, and others that just fell apart when they went through painful things. We all saw this. So their team wants to know why. Why does this happen? And again, I've already told you the answer to that. That verse in Hebrews already told you the answer to it. It's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you that determines how resilient you'll be. He said one of the central elements of resilience is perception. Do you conceptualize an event as traumatic, or is this an opportunity to learn and grow? Events are not traumatic until we experience them as traumatic. That's what their research has discovered. So really what you need to think about this morning as you're sitting right here. Think about the challenging track that you're on, the failure areas, the challenge areas, the things that are not going right in your life, and you ask the question, how am I looking at it? How am I looking at it? Because that's what the research discovered. See, what happens so often, and the reason why resilience is declining, is that we fall into one of the 3 Ps when we go through, something bad happens in our life. Here are the 3 Ps. We think it's permanent. We begin to think it's like, it'll never change. It will always be this bad. I will always feel this bad. Some of you, that's what you do. Something bad happens, you're really in pain, and you're like, it'll never get better. What? Really? But we let ourselves think those thoughts. It's not true. The other thing is pervasive. We think that it's every area of our life. We become one-track minded. So because I failed at my job, or I failed at my relationship, or I failed in my finances, therefore everything is failing. Well, that's not true either. But we let these thoughts in, and then the third one is that we begin to think we personalize it, and we say, therefore I am a failure. Therefore I am a loser. Loser. We personalize our mistakes and failures. Rather than saying, I failed, I say, I am a failure. You hear the difference? Guess which one? Any of these things, when they get into your head, they will destroy your ability to be resilient. So let me show you what the Bible says, again, should be our thoughts in our heads when things go really, really bad for us. So I'm going to show you verses that changed my life years ago. I memorized these verses years ago from the book of Hebrews, and I have depended on these since the day I learned them. And if you want to know the secret to my resilience, my ability to bounce back from terrible pain, this is it. Hebrews 12, it says this, I want you to endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Now, some of you, just hearing that for the first time, are like, that doesn't sound very nice. Well, how did that help you? Well, I'm going to show you how it specifically helped me, but I'll tell you right now, when I understood what these verses were teaching, the day this clicked in my head, and the first time I read it, I'm like, are you kidding me? I was so surprised by what he was teaching here. But when I learned it, this is what it did. On your notes, write this down. It meant all the suffering in my life to this point has purpose in God's hands. That's what it meant. All the suffering in my life, it's not wasted. It's not meaningless. It's not evil triumphing over good. All of it, all the suffering in your life, all the things that have gone wrong on that track in your entire life, all of them in God's hands have purpose. So how do I get that out of these verses? Let me show you. First thing you have to learn to do is just what that verse said. You need to learn to view all the pain and failure and suffering in your life as if it was discipline from God. So that's what he says. View it as if God was disciplining you. This is not natural for us. But the as if is really important. Look at what he says. Again, endure hardship as discipline. He's not saying God is disciplining you. So every time something bad happens, your car engine blows up this week, God's disciplining you. You did something wrong, so now you're going to be disciplined. No, he says, view it as if it was discipline. So I've been disciplined in my life appropriately. When I was a young boy, I was rather mischievous. I remember one time, my brother Barry and I used to love to play this game in the basement of our house where we would play dodgeball with pillows. And so we'd draw a line in the middle, imaginary line in the middle of our basement floor, and we'd chuck pillows at each other, trying to hit each other and get each other out. And then my dad started remodeling the basement. And then Dad put up his shell collection from when he was stationed in Hawaii. He had gathered these beautiful shells. And he mounted them on this heavy wooden board that was big, covered in purple cloth, mounted all these beautiful shells from when he was stationed there in Hawaii. We were living in Wisconsin at the time. And he put it up on this shelf, about 6 feet up in this basement that we were in. So he said, boys, don't do this anymore. No more throwing pillows. You got it, Dad. Yeah. Wasn't much later. Barry, let's play dodgeball. And let's play with pillows. And so sure enough, we draw the line. We start throwing pillows, and I chuck one at Barry and miss and hit the shell collection as it's standing up on the shelf, and it pushes it flat against the wall because he hadn't mounted it to the wall. He was just leaning on that shelf, and I saw it tip. It's like slow motion, and fall 6 feet straight down onto the concrete floor. It pulverized every shell. I was disciplined. I was disciplined for doing something that I should not have done, that I knew I shouldn't have done. There was very normal correction for what I'd done, and I deserved it. So he says, I want you to learn to view everything difficult in your life. Think about something difficult in your life right now, that track where things are not going well. Maybe it's something in your job. Maybe it's something in a key relationship. It's not going well. Something in your personal finances not going well. He said, it's not that God is disciplining you. He said, I want you to think of it as discipline. Now, why is that important? Who cares? Because then you can do the second thing. Now you can ask the right question. You won't ask the right question when you're failing or struggling or in pain without that first thing in your mind. Okay, I'm going to treat this as if God was disciplining me. So now I need to ask the right question. Because there's a question you should always ask when you're in pain. One of the interesting things I read when I was prepping this message is this one author said, another troubling emergence in the psychology of today's young adults is their fear of learning the lessons that failure offers. They fear it. They fear failure, and they don't spend any time thinking about the lessons that we can learn from it. So the Bible is really clear about this. It says, again, back to that verse, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who, look at the last part, who have been trained by it. Did you know that God can use every painful thing you've ever gone through in your life to train you? Did you know that? He can use every painful thing in your life to make you better. We tend not to think of it that way. But he is very clear. So the question that you need to ask when you're in the middle of something painful, in the middle of some failure in your life is this: Father, what do you want me to learn? What do you want me to learn? What can I learn from this situation right now that I'm in? It totally shifts your perspective. This is so important for you to be resilient in life. Is to start to learn from the painful things that you are going through rather than just letting them be pain. God can use them to bring something better into your life in the future. Let me give an example of it. This guy's name is Damon Red. Lives in Colorado. And he started his own advertising company, graphic arts, and selling products online. In 2013, though, there was a problem. Do you remember what happened in Colorado in 2013? Historic flooding. Remember this? Some of you remember this. He woke up September 12th, 2013. He was thankfully sleeping upstairs in his home with his family. He came downstairs to find the entire thing was under 5 feet of water. Just unbelievable how much damage there was. He said it was all gone in an instant. He said the hardest thing I've ever gone through to lose everything I had built. Because now a lot of people, they did not get back up after the flooding. He did. It was interesting how it happened. He said, I designed this hat before the flood. They had our logo on them, which was a snowflake in a water drop in the colors of the Colorado flag. So when samples of the hat arrived a few days after the disaster, I was struck by how much the design reflected Colorado's strength after the flood. He said, I just posted about them on Facebook, and the post went viral. We ended up pre-selling enough hats to save the entire company, and it turned the disaster into a triumph. Now, that alone is cool. That alone is God saying, you think this is just bad. Watch how I can bring good out of something bad. That's cool enough, but that's not where the story ends, thankfully, because then what he did is what I'm telling you to do. When you view everything as discipline and you start saying, okay, God, this is really painful. What can I learn from this? That's when real positive life change happens. He said that's what he began to do. He said, I can now say the flood was the best thing that ever happened to the company and to himself. How many of you would say that about the worst moment in your life? It was the best thing that ever happened. Oh, man. Because this is what it did for him. He said, I realized I needed to change my production process. It made me rethink everything I was doing. And losing everything also gave me a new perspective on what's important in life. It got me thinking more about my family and less about material things. And it forced him to realize that his company should have an external focus rather than an internal focus. And now his company is involved in serving their community. Tremendous good out of tremendous bad. So the question is that the question you're asking in the middle of the pain that you're in right now? Are you saying, God, what do you want me to learn from this? What do you want me to change? What would you like me to do differently? The pain that you're in right now, is that the question that you're asking? If you are, then, again, rooted in God, I'm going to view this as if it was discipline from you, and discipline, what do you want me to learn from it? And then, third thing, you remember his promise to bring good from it. I just showed you that in the flooding story, how he brings good from things that just don't seem good to us, but this is really important. Remember God's promise to bring good from what you go through. Look at, again, back at this verse, how it ends. He says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. And then look at these next two words. They're our favorite words, right? Later on, right? Because, no, of course not. We wanted to say, and then immediately, God will do something good. He says, oh no, later on, it will produce something really positive in your life. You can live with peace and contentment and righteousness and these beautiful qualities in your life later on. We don't like the words later on, right? We want now. We want, okay, God, I'll do what you say. I'm going to view this as discipline. I'm going to say, what would you like me to learn? And then you're going to immediately bless everything. You're going to turn it right around and bring something good out of it right now. I don't want to wait till later on, but he's very clear it's later on. And it's not the only time he said that. Take a look at this verse. Romans 8:28 says, we know that God causes, look at, what's the word? Everything. By the way, these are on the back of your notes because I wanted you to have them today. We know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Now think about the most painful things you've lived through to this point in your life. Think about those. And understand the promise that God has made you. He said, I will, everything you've gone through, I can bring good out of. Understand his promise to you. God has promised to bring good from everything I go through. 2 Corinthians, he says, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. And so God has also promised when you're on that tough track, when the tough track is really tough, he said, not only will I bring good from this, I promise I will comfort you in the middle of it. I'll comfort you. It's not all he's promised. The Lord is my shepherd. How many of you know these verses? There's nothing I lack. In green pastures he makes me lie down. To still waters he leads me. And then look at the last part. He says, I will restore your soul. And some of you have hit bumps so big on that tough track that you didn't know if you could ever come back from it. And God says, I can restore souls. He promises to restore your soul. And that's not all. Jesus is talking about the Father in heaven, said, my Father's always working. So am I. There is never a moment in your life, where God isn't already at work in your life to bring good out of what you've suffered. It never happens. There's never a moment where he stops working. And you need to understand, with the difficulties that you're going through right now, God is already at work, because Jesus promised it. He's already at work in your life to bring good from what you've gone through. Did you know that? He's working right now behind the scenes, and later on, those two words we love so much, he promises that he will bring good from what you've gone through. Easy to stand here and talk about this. Tougher to really live it, right? These are so important to me that they literally are in my notebook where I write down the things I'm praying about. And these are promises that I filter my problems through. I remember and remind myself constantly that when I'm in tough times, God is going to bring good from this. He promises me that. And God will restore my broken soul. He promises me that. And God will comfort me in the middle of this because he promises me that. And God is already at work bringing good from this, even though I can't even see how, because he promised that. And if you don't know this about God, God cannot lie. God cannot lie. So this is the basis for my resilience. Let me show you how I'm using it right now. I have two tracks in my life. I have two tracks. I got a good track. And man, life is good. And I feel good. And I'm so grateful. I live with so much gratitude to God. I have so much to be grateful for in my life right now. And at the same time, I have a track. There's some pretty painful things on that track. One of the most challenging is 3 years ago when my divorce happened, and some of you know, my dad never spoke to me again, but even more difficult, he has prevented my mom from having any relationship with me. Once in a while, she will call me or send a note to me, and all she wants is to be able to be in relationship with me. I haven't seen my mom in almost 3 years now. That's a pretty painful track. That hurts a lot. And I got two tracks in my life, like all of you. But I'm not a one-track person, not at all. I have two. And I cling to the promises God has made me. So here's what he says to you, Brian. He says, I want you to view this tough thing in your life as if it was discipline from me. Okay, God, I'm going to view this as if it was you disciplining me. In discipline, the most important question is, God, what do you want me to learn in the middle of this? And sometimes it's not obvious. But here's what's important about it. It's just asking the question that's important, because it shifts you from this inward focus to this outward focus. It's the discipline of asking the question that's so important for your brain. I'm going to view this as, God, what can I learn from this? Because it's when God begins to really add meaning and purpose to the pain that you're going through. And then you wait. Because later on, my God says, Brian, you'll see later on that I'll bring good from this. And in the middle of it, he restored my soul. And he has comforted me so many times. And here's what I know is absolutely true. I can't see this at all, have no idea what he's doing, but God, my God, is already at work in this situation to bring something good about it. That is completely true. And later on, I get to see that. And that's why I'm resilient, even when I'm on this track. Does that make sense? You see how to do this? For those of you who follow Jesus, again, you got 2 tracks, right? You have 2. You don't have 1. You have 2 tracks. And you are just normal having 2 tracks. Welcome to the human race. You're normal. Nothing wrong with you. But what's your attitude toward the second track? Nobody likes the second track, all right? It's not like I'm saying, hey, you need to like the second track. I'm not saying that. I don't like the second track. I would love to be a 1-track person, but I'm not and never will be. So I'm not asking you to like it. I'm just asking you to consider what your attitude is towards the second track, and I'm asking you to do what God says, to be resilient. To be resilient, to say to God, all right, God, I know I'm going to view this difficulty in my life as if it was discipline from your hands. That's what I'm going to choose. So in discipline, the most important question is, what do you want me to learn? And I'm going to look to you, God, and I'm going to say, what can I learn from this? And I'm going to wait, because later on, I know what you promised is true. I know you're going to fulfill this. I know you're already at work right now. And then you bounce back because you know you got God. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. Maybe some of you here today or watching are really struggling with this whole God thing. Our God is such a personal God. He has made some amazing promises. The most amazing promise of all is his promise to forgive us and to put us in his family and to come and make his home inside of us. And it's in this, accepting this gift in your life, that you get God and his promises. And it all begins with a simple act of surrender, where you understand that Jesus was not lying when he said what he said, that he had come on a rescue mission 2,000 years ago to bleed and die on a cross to pay for what we've done that's wrong. All the unloving things we've ever said and done, he paid for on the cross that day so that we could be forgiven and made right with God and put in his family forever. If you want a relationship with a God who makes these amazing promises, you can have it this morning, right now. With your faith, say something like this in your heart to him. Say, Jesus, I turn to you right now. I cry out to you. I'm asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to come and make your home inside of me. I believe you died on that cross for me. I want a real relationship with you going forward. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish again today, would you all take your little connection card out of your program? Just take a minute and fill us out. Even if you're a regular attender, I ask you to do this every week. Some of you just prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you. Check that box. Let us know what you've done. Or maybe you renewed your commitment. Just check that box and let us know what you've done. And then just drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back by the doors where you came in. Thanks so much for coming, and hope to see you again next week.